happy to see such a big crowd considering the hour. I'm Keld Jørgensen. I'm heading up the corporate business development function at Lundbeck. Lundbeck, as you know from the past, has been represented within psychiatry. But over the last 5 years, we have advanced and expanded our operations into neurospecialty and into neuro-rare. We are right now on the market with what we call the most powerful CGRP molecule. And we also have gotten the first proof of concept in phase 2 for a PACAP inhibitor within preventive migraine. Within neurospecialty, we are also looking at the first proof of concept for a alpha-synuclein antibody in MSA. MSA is a horrible disease. It is also called the little brother of Parkinson's, but much more rapid in its advance and often fatal within 10 years only. So both of those two pipeline molecules we have are potentially the first in class. And today we are going to talk about new modalities and new targets. And we have a panel of probably 100 years of experience within this area. And in terms of the area, we are speaking about both mental disorders. And if you ever wondered if this is important, I would highlight that mental disorders is suffering, you can say 1 in 8 around the world is suffering from a mental disorder. And neurology, I would say that it's probably the leading cause of disease around the world. So let me go down the line and let the panel introduce themselves.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Antti Vuolanto. I'm the CEO of Herantis Pharma. We are a public company from Finland. We develop disease-modifying therapy for Parkinson's disease. And our lead asset that we call as HER096, which is a peptide molecule, is currently in phase 1b clinical study in Parkinson's patients. Last year, we ran a phase 1a clinical study demonstrating great safety profile, but also very efficient brain penetration after subcutaneous administration. And what makes us a bit unique is that, of course, we have great preclinical data, but we also have clinical proof of concept with a previous molecule, a protein, CDNF protein that we studied in 17 fairly advanced Parkinson's patients. And now the link is that the current peptide has the same mechanism of action as the CDNF protein, as the peptide mimics the active side of the protein. So we have been advancing this program quite rapidly, and as a sign of that, we also have a strong support from the Michael J. Fox Foundation and Parkinson's UK, who are financing our phase 1b clinical study currently. So pleased to be here.
Okay, I'm Carlos Buesa. I'm the CEO of Oryzon Genomics, a publicly listed company in Spain. We are developing epigenetic molecules that in the fields of oncology and CNS. And in CNS, we were presenting yesterday at the European College of Neurological Pharmacology in Milan the results of our phase 2b data in borderline personality disorder with our LFZ1 inhibitor, bafidemstat. So epigenetics and chromatin remodulation is playing a role in neurodevelopmental disorders, is playing a role in psychiatric disorders as well. And in this global clinical trial that we were presenting yesterday, we saw an improvement on the primary endpoints in aggression and in overall disease, overall severity, which, however, failed to be significant. But in the secondary endpoints that we were looking at the same aspects with other scales in aggression by the Staxi-3 anger and in the overall improvement by BEST, we saw a very strong and clinically significant reduction of these symptomatologies. So we have been very busy discussing the results with the agency, with the FDA. Borderline personality disorders is a very serious mental disease for which there is no currently any drug approved. So there is a huge medical need. And we need to keep advancing this field, and we are somehow defining the field as we advance. So one thing that is key and it's not only restricted to borderline personality disorder, but one thing which is key is to define as a community how we measure the patient's evolution under a clinical treatment. And I think that we can later on in the discussion address some of the latest FDA suggestions and remarks and things like that to somehow illustrate the task that we have ahead of us for defining how we could improve the clinical trials and the clinical relevance of our compounds in diseases like schizophrenia, like borderline personality disorder, like depression, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, very nice being here today. So my name is Federico Bolognani. I'm a physician scientist and I'm the Chief Medical Officer of IAMA Therapeutics. So at IAMA Therapeutics is a company that started at the Italian Institute of Technology in Genoa with a very novel chemistry and science around one molecular target in the brain called NKCC1. And we have developed for the first time, the first ever NKCC1 selective small molecule. We are finishing phase 1 and we are in the middle of the preparations for next year starting our phase 2 trials. And we are planning to position this new drug in autism spectrum disorder as well as some specific forms of epilepsy. So looking forward to the discussion and conversation today.
So great to be after Federico because I'm the CEO and founder of STALICLA. So we've been leading the field of precision neurodevelopment for the last 7 years. We have a clinically validated platform, precision medicine platform that goes from patient stratification to drug and can also operate in the inverse directionality. We have a proof of concept on a first biologically defined subpopulation of patients with autism spectrum disorder, and we're now getting ready to embark into 2 phase 2 trials for 2 biologically distinct and defined patient populations with autism spectrum disorder. So yeah, that's what we do, precision medicine in neurodevelopment, and we had agreed with Federico before the panel that we would point out the field of neurodevelopmental disorders as a field of very high unmet medical need. Autism is not just the genius programmer or the few of us with quirkiness around the room. It's also people who have round-the-clock need for care with immense unmet medical need, and for who a switch in self-help and executive function can be extremely clinically meaningful. So it's a sub-entity that's sort of distinct from psychiatry and neurology, but belongs to both.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Rupert Haynes. I'm CEO of Avata Biosciences. It's a privately owned pharmaceutical company looking at neurological and psychiatric diseases. Our lead asset is Avata21, which is in development for focal onset seizures. We're also in a partnership with Oxford University to develop a phase 2B in schizophrenia for early onset. We raised some seed money and then stepped into the optimization of our product, which we put into a development into Australia, and I'm now looking at raising cash for phase 3. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for the introductions. And the thought today was to take you through a couple of recent events that have sort of characterized development within neuroscience over the past years, and what have sort of driven the valuations within neuroscience. Look at some of the challenges that we have also seen, and then go into the more sort of exciting next wave of frontiers that we see developing over the next near-term horizon. So with that, I would sort of ask the panel. A lot has happened over the last, let's say, 5 years. What do you think has been the most sort of important steps over the last couple of years, or developments?
You go.
Whatever.
Go ahead,
yeah.
Carlos. You go on.
You can go. I'll go after.
No, I mean, it's obvious that we have seen something which has been, I would say, monumental in the sense that for first time we have seen some approvals in Alzheimer's. And that was, I mean, that has been the immense graveyard in the field for many, many, many years. So I think that the advent of Leqembi, which is a molecule which is showing a certain promise, and now Lilly and so on has opened a field and has cleared the field and the air for the community, for the investors, for the patients, that even the toughest indications are possible to be addressed. It's funny because when we were presenting the top line data in borderline personality disorder, one of the most strong key opinion leaders, I'm not going to mention his name, but he said, well, borderline personality disorder has been always considered an undruggable and untreatable disease. So this kind of fatalism in the field coming from a success of, a set of failures, I think is evaporating somehow. And what we have seen very recently on the schizophrenia field, I mean, with Karuna, with S.r.l, I think this is also, I mean, very interesting and is refreshing the air. So I would say.
Maybe just one small comment.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
I think I'd like to go. So,
Okay.
I think that what you just mentioned, and that's the reason why I wanted to go, about Karuna and S.r.l, was very disruptive in terms of how neurosciences and neuropsychiatry is being perceived from an investment standpoint and from a business standpoint, because even this room 3 years ago was less full, and we're really seeing a shift in the way that the opportunity in the space is being perceived from the investor standpoint, be it venture or on the receiving end from strategics. And I think that to springboard on what Carlos just said, yes, there have been advances in Alzheimer's, but as you said, in schizophrenia as well. And schizophrenia was one of these also challenging neuropsychiatric, not neurodegenerative, neuropsychiatric indications, and even neurodevelopmental. And we're seeing that with new stratifications, new strategies, dual targeting. I'm thinking CAR-XT here. We're really seeing advancements, and we're seeing lead VCs in the US willing to invest very large amounts on dual modalities in previously considered unsolvable indications. So I really see a positive trend here. You go.
Yeah, so just one comment on both.
Oh, you need to
remarks.
turn it on.
So, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, good.
Just one comment on those remarks. I think that this is just a perception about the risk in neuroscience, because actually, when every year you look at the list of drugs approved by FDA, you actually see that neuroscience is highly represented, even more than other areas that are usually perceived as less risky than neuroscience. And just look around. I mean, you were mentioning the Alzheimer's drugs. There have been some recent approvals in neuromuscular disorders, even in psychiatry. So I think that is more a perception. And actually, when you look historically at all the FDA approvals, and we can discuss whether this is because there are 20 SSRIs and 30 neuroleptics, but when you look historically as well, FDA has approved more drugs in neuroscience in general than many other therapeutic areas that are perceived to be less risky and more difficult. So I think that we need to change that perception.
Very good. And I also just want to, because it often gets overlooked, but actually Lundbeck had also a neuropsychiatry approval in agitation associated with dementia and Alzheimer, which was the first full approval for 20 years or so in Alzheimer. So there's several moving items within Alzheimer that we should all be, in a way, proud of as an industry, but also happy that we see these movements. Then, of course, also I would turn to, there's been more challenges in other areas. So if you look back over the last years, has there been areas where you see, okay, this turned out to be more challenging than others, and back to the drawing board?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with neurodegenerative diseases. So, although I would say that first of all, the Alzheimer's success, yes, somewhat successful. But if you look at the regulatory point of view, okay, there are approvals in the US, but not in Europe. And how you align these, and then for a small company, how you can predict what can be provable and what not, that's a challenge for in a way for us. But then if you go to Parkinson's disease, we would have thought that we would have seen like alpha-synuclein specific antibodies, like in Alzheimer's, also the success in Parkinson's disease, but we haven't seen. Actually, the studies have failed so far. So that's a challenge. But maybe it also tells that it can be that the antibodies are in a way cleaning the garbage, but they don't affect the actual mechanism of why there are these accumulation of toxic proteins. So maybe there should be, in a way, a shift also for the target, or going forward, it should be a combination of the cleaning part, so cleaning the aggregates, but also then affecting on the synthesis of these aggregates. So maybe more like holistic view on how you affect the well-being of the target cells.
Do you think it could also be the antibodies itself, like we have seen, for example, with the first generation targeting tau, as such that there would be a improvement in the the agents themselves?
Absolutely, I believe strongly in that, but who knows when we have efficacious enough antibodies available.
Other comments?
I just think I'm a little bit different from the other panelists, as they're doing the hard work. They're doing the bottom-up work, starting at the very beginning with these great theories, receptors, etc., and then taking that out of the lab into the animal model, and then into humans. And you just see a pattern of the further you go, the more difficult that is. Phase 2 could look really good, but we've seen time and time again hit phase 3, and it goes belly up. It's just tough. And so when we say disappointment, I think it's kind of part and parcel of development in this area. It's just a really difficult area. And a lot of the diseases cross over, don't they? So you don't really end up with a heterogeneous population. And when you scale up to big phase 3s, the rubber hits the road and can confound a study.
So maybe one comment, and I think that Lynn has also some comments on that. I think that from my point of view, and having run so many trials in the neuroscience space, I think that one problem in the field that explains many of the failures is the execution of those programs. So when programs move from phase 2 to phase 3, then there's a different type of team taking over those programs. And we all know that clinical trials in neuroscience are quite tricky, especially in terms of endpoints, the experts that you have in your clinical sites, and many times these things are completely overlooked when programs move to phase 3. So I think that one thing that the field has to evolve is to keep that rigor in conducting the late stage trials, the same type of rigor that we usually use and applied in the early trials. And that this is critical. I think that Lynn has other comments around this as well. Yeah.
No, I totally agree with what you just said. And I think that obviously execution and endpoints is critical. The domain expertise to execute in phase 3. But I think that one of the main reasons why we're not seeing signals that are observed in proof of concept or phase 2 translate into phase 3 is because of the question that we're asking in neuropsychiatric indications. And the question that we're asking is, how can I treat a patient with autism spectrum disorder? How can I treat a patient with schizophrenia? And that question is not scientifically sound, because these indications are behaviorally defined, and behavioral classifications are a legacy from the 19th century. And behavior doesn't offer sufficient, if any, insight into the underlying biology. So what we need to do is we need to obey by the rules, which are FDA driven, and that's the DSM-5, but we need to stratify within DSM indications. Otherwise, we'll keep failing. And where we do succeed is because we're not being specific, meaning that when we're developing atypical neuroleptics or variants of atypical neuroleptics, Well, you can give them to patients with schizophrenia, but they'll also count down patients with autism or even every one of us. So I think that, that's the problem that we're addressing in our space.
Yeah, I might add a small comment on that. I think that this is indeed one of the challenges that we are facing. I mean, somehow we are still doing a medicine which is 19th century, as you said. But the way that we define how we measure patients is key. And even right now, with the tools that we have, I think that it's room for improvement with the current tools. There was the other day a very interesting seminar held by the FDA where they were discussing in schizophrenia, and they were discussing precisely the endpoints on not only in positive but also in negative symptoms. And the director of the division of schizophrenia of the CNS, Tiffany Marchioni, that probably you know. I mean, she said basically that we should look for endpoints that really matters to the patients on their daily lives. So, and this is basically something that we should consider. Because, I mean, there are clean rows, like, for instance, the CGI that has been used forever, for ages. And it's on a scale of 1 to 7 that is rated by a rater. So I don't know how this might capture the day-to-day life of a schizophrenic patient or an autistic patient or a borderline personality patient. So there are room for improvement in the battery of tools that we have. I think that the FDA is conscious of that. And I think that we have still work to do to try to define better how we measure what we want to measure on the clinical trials.
So maybe to wrap up on that, we one of the keys in our field and something that's really emerging is to integrate with traditional behavioral endpoints that have a regulatory stamp on them, some translational endpoints. So basically, some endpoints, some tools that have been there for years, including EEG, and where paradigms are well validated, and where we're seeing target engagement and physiological mechanisms and correlating them with behavioral endpoints that are approvable. So using these as translational bridge between what we're trying to change, which is the behavioral endpoint, and the target engagement.
Very good. So let's stay somewhat in the same area of neuropsychiatry, but look ahead and talk about targets and modalities. So what do you see as up and coming targets and modalities that in that space? Is it psychedelics? Is it what do you see?
Yeah, so maybe a few words from my side. I think that neuroscience is such a large field, and that there are no general rules of which modality or which targets we can generalize to the entire field. I mean, if we think about neurodegeneration or epilepsy or neurodevelopment, not all modalities will apply to all these fields. So, and I think that that's an important consideration. So maybe we need to start subdividing neuroscience on different fields and not trying to put everything in the same category. For example, you were asking about neuropsychiatry. Of course, many of the modalities that are being very successful in some neurological indications, such as, for example, gene therapies, and we have some positive examples. I don't think that will work, in neuropsychiatry, for example, right? So I think that the modality will depend on the indication and in which subfield of neuroscience we are talking about.
I think combinatories, just like in oncology, have a very bright future. And I'm going to speak again about KarXT. With where you're addressing core mechanisms, but also anticipating loopholes or reducing side effects. And I think that, for example, an example that I just gave in the muscarinic M4 targeting, we're seeing a lot of activity following the Karuna transaction, and there's space for new candidates in that specific area. But I totally concur with Federico. the question is very vague, and it depends on which biological subgroup of patient we're talking about. Not even on which modality, or not even on which indication, but on which subpopulation.
I think. Sorry,
go ahead.
No, I think it always helps if you know that it works in humans first, and I don't mean to be flippant. When I joined GW, there was a situation in the US that probably a lot of you are familiar with, that you had parents crossing state borders to go to Colorado to get CBD oil to treat their children who had having 100 seizures a day, and they were giving it to them. And it worked, and any parent would do the same. Who cares? And they broke the law, going across the state borders, going back home. But that was a real insight, and it's a luxury to have, because it's virtually, quite unique in our business. But knowing that then I joined GW to head up the global marketing, spent several years doing that, launching it in the US and also in Europe. But knowing that was the catalyst to saying, well, we just have to make a medicine. We can back into this. And I don't mean to be flippant, but people say, what was the mode of action of it? We don't know. And most of these products, we don't know. We don't have to build the case. And I think some of the new exciting areas that are coming through are actually with the psychedelics, where you have a similar situation where there's recreational use with MDMA, and people say it's helped my PTSD, with ketamine for depression, which is very interesting, and also for ketamine for addiction, which is very interesting. And with THC, we have a THC product. It's been shown to be very good for opiate sparing. It's almost it's a luxury. So I think Avata Biosciences is like top down, and we're targeting areas like epilepsy and schizophrenia where we know it works because people have taken it and they say there's anecdotal evidence, not science, and that gives us like the volition to sort of progress into more overt clinical development. We'll work out the mode of action later. If it's safe and it works, then that's pretty good. So I think those psychedelic areas are very, very interesting. And I was at Oxford University last Monday giving a talk on how academia can work better with the industry, which is interesting. And the other discussions there were a lot around the psychedelics and advances in psychedelic medicine. So I think there's something there. There are challenges, and particularly say with psilocybin, and actually constructing those studies. But companies like Compass are working on that. Whether they'll be successful, I don't know. But the one I think I'd pick out is definitely ketamine. It has a lot of legs there, and I think we'll see a lot more coming through because we know it works.
Very good. Yeah, certainly it addresses some of the points about working in treatment-resistant populations, rapid acting. So there's a lot to like. If we move more to neurology, core neurology, and some of you are well represented in that area. So what do you see there in terms of the modalities and upcoming targets? I guess the modalities is there much more front and center than the targets, because there's a lot more to choose between than in psychiatry?
Well, that's a challenging question. First of all, in neurodegeneration, there is a quite limited number of patients that are associated with some genetic modification. So targeting that is maybe not that a general approach. Then there have been these antibodies. Yeah, they can be successful and most likely will be at least treating some part of the patients. We need to remember that, for example, Leqembi showed 5 months delay in disease progression. So it definitely doesn't solve the problem of Alzheimer's. It's a start. But who knows what will be the winning modality? I don't know. I hope that it's our approach, but yeah, who knows?
I mean, obviously, it's good to get proof of concept before you start sticking it to brain shuttles and such. But there is a lot also when we move on to targets within. I mean, if you look at the neuroinflammation space, or the success that we have seen with FcRns, or mediating the complement system, etc., there's been an enormous amount of positive and value created over the last couple of years in that space. And we see it continue as well. Comments on targets?
Well, not immediately exactly on targets, but I did want to add something to the discussion, which was that there's a difference between not having a unique target and not understanding the mechanism of action. And this is moreover the case in the last 5 to 10 years, where gene expression profiling for drug discovery, notably in polygenic indications, where we're looking to cluster patients at the pathway level, and we realize that drugs which we used to call having off-target effects actually have therapeutic importance in their mechanism of action. And I think that we're seeing an emerging field in psychiatry, notably at the discovery stage, but also in early development, where we have drugs with what we used to call relatively dirty mechanisms, but that actually have therapeutic effect through their off-target effects that we now better understand through the readouts that we can have through gene expression profiling.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it was yesterday, before yesterday in Milano, a whole session about precision medicine in CNS, in psychiatry. And yeah, it is very difficult to identify what can be a target when you see, for instance, in schizophrenia, there were like 240 specific genotypes and genes involved or correlated somehow with the disease. So it's very difficult to funnel this, to identify, which can be at the end of the day, if there is one, or probably there are several, smoking guns who are triggering the disease. But I think that one of the things that is encouraging is that what we are seeing now in certain neurodevelopmental syndromes, what we are basically learning from certain neurodevelopmental syndromes, they are basically showing a number of genes which are involved in the onset and evolution of these syndromes. And these are curiously, in some cases, the same pairs or the same triads that are responsible for cancer. So it happens that, for instance, when you see leukemias, and that's fascinating, a number of leukemias are driven by modifications in histone methyltransferases and histone demethylases. And then when you see syndromes like Kleefstra syndrome or like Kabuki syndrome, which are affecting the basically the developmental, the neuronal developmental in the womb and after birth, are basically the same. So I think that these are fields where we can open our we can zoom out and we can try to learn from this cross biology and to identify new pathways, if not targets, pathways which might be involved. Because at the end of the day, a neuron doesn't divide. So if a blast gets crazy, you get leukemia. If a neuron gets crazy, you get something else. You can either get apoptosis and then you get a neurodegenerative disorder, or you can just get a wrong firing and then you might have schizophrenia. We don't know yet. But I think that we have these diseases, these neurodevelopmental syndromes, where we might have the tools now to learn from the biology and to try to project this on these other more large indications in the neurodegenerative space and in the neuropsychiatric space.
Yeah, well, obviously, I was going to respond to this because that's the whole idea behind the platform that we've developed over the last 7 years. So we've screened thousands of patients in our observational biosampling study, and the way we know that there are more than 1,000 genes and variants to date associated with autism, and that only covers 20% of the autism population. So it has no, the indication has no biological construct validity. So one of the ways, or one of the point of entries to start identifying signal in these disease indications is to acknowledge that the questions that we're asking are not correct, but still operate within these indications. So from a regulatory standpoint, we can progress. And the way that we can do it is by leveraging on data that had not previously been considered relevant in the field, as you just mentioned. So what we originally did is we started collecting family disease history of other diseases, including oncologic diseases, morphotypes, for example, macrocephaly, because it enriches for sets of genes that are involved in cellular proliferation and synaptic pruning and autophagy. And we're seeing clusters of patients who have family disease history of specific oncologic conditions. And we actually then start using these as a way to include patients in clinical trials, and we start detecting biological signal and EEG signal. So it is actually a point, it's more than associations. These are actually ways to cluster patients. And it's really, and at the end of the day, it meets with the biology, because you were talking about cancer. I mean, P10 is known to be very strongly, so P10 mutation is known to be very strongly associated with a monogenetic neurodevelopmental disorder, but it's also highly involved in cancer. So yes, we are systems, and systems psychiatry is probably the starting point for precision medicine in the field.
Very good. We are seeing oncology targets popping up in early research in neuroscience. That's for sure. So let me just, I mean, there's been also a great development within the use of biomarkers, and we have touched a little bit upon precision medicines already, but if we talk about use of biomarkers, or even talk about using biomarkers as surrogates for endpoints, I think that's a fascinating area, and at Lundbeck we are also doing our utmost to have biomarker data driven clinical studies, and as early as you can sort of guide your decision making, the better it is. How do you see that? Obviously, we had the SOD1 ALS approval, which was using a surrogate. We've had others. Some have maybe disappointed a bit in terms of the clinical relevance. After all, if you look at some of the exon skipping agents, but how do you see the use of biomarkers increasing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges, especially for biotech companies. I mean, big pharma maybe it's a little bit different, but it's the fact that sometimes you are facing the challenge of developing your drug at the same time that you have to build your biomarkers and try to qualify those biomarkers and demonstrate that they can act as surrogate biomarkers. And this is a big challenge, especially for small organizations. So I think that this is one of the areas that is where private and public and charities should come together to start working on things, because some of those biomarkers will go across different programs and can be used by different companies, etc. So I see a lot of value, and I can describe some positive examples on that. But I think that this is something that has to happen more often, in which everybody comes together, in a pre-competitive manner to develop those tools that will be needed for drug development.
But I think there's also a difference between biomarkers and companion diagnostic. We don't have to develop companion diagnostics. What we can do is develop biomarkers to inform our R&D and to be able to select our inclusion criteria that can be clinically, objective. Morphological features, family disease history that we correlate with biomarker within our development. And then we can get approvals, we can get approvals on the general indication, indicating in the label that this was done in an enriched population that is supported by ongoing R&D with biomarkers. So we don't have to get a CDX developed in parallel and have $100 million to spend in phase 3. And that doesn't mean that when you start getting commercial, you can't continue your work on biomarkers and potential future CDX. But I think that it's a more realistic approach. So supporting your research and development through this, but not going for a full CDX, and it can work.
Certainly a lot of money being poured in now to finding blood-based biomarkers for alpha-synuclein.
Well, Roche can do it, but the biotechs.
So I don't want to leave you without just having a temperature check on how the funding environment is, because all of those new innovations that are coming to, hopefully coming to market, they all need funding. And I know that you are all CEOs or actively engaged in funding right now. So with all those upsides that we have seen over the last couple of years, how is the market actually?
So we're all actively fundraising, obviously, but I think that the market, we came out of the winter of biotech, but the first I would say, space to come out was neuroscience and actually neuropsychiatry. No one was expecting that. And we're really seeing, that finally neuropsychiatry is hot, if I may. We're on the tail of the Karuna deal. We're really seeing players like PureTech in the Boston area that are really fueling enthusiasm. We're seeing strategics stepping back in. We're seeing tier one venture funds in the US who execute on transactions such as for example, the Addex Neurosterix recent transaction, where basically Addex spinned out its M4 and other of its compounds into a perceptive financed spin-off, is a clear example of how things are warming up in our space. So I think it's actually a good time, and I'm talking just about the last weeks to 2 months.
Very good.
Yeah, I tend to agree that things are improving after summer. Before that, it has been really challenging for a small company, but there are signs, and hopefully we can see good news from us and other companies that we are getting financed again properly in order to conduct like maybe a little bit longer horizon studies and programs.
Rupert, you had a
Yeah, no, we again a little bit different from you guys. We tested the water back in this time last year actually, and VCs saying, well, you need these components. You need to have your phase one. What did the FDA think? Sort your CMC out, and how you're going to manufacture it at those high volumes, which we did, and did it quickly as well. And it's a small molecule. It's not complicated. And so we formally went out and did our fundraising, kicked it off the end of May, beginning of June, and it's been pretty good. We've got 6 VCs in our BDR doing DD, 3 of the top VCs in the world. We've got 3 strategics looking at us, 2 US, 1 Europe, and we have 2 Japanese companies looking to license. So I'd say it's from my point of view, it's pretty good. But to say that we present an offering of being very de-risked. We know it works. We go straight from phase 1 to phase 3 with all the caveats, and we don't carry that risk that, with all respect, that the more difficult work has to be done from other companies building out from the bottom, from the bottom to the top. So all in all, we've had a pretty good response, and I can't really gauge if that's improving or not. I know everyone says green shoots, but my experience has been pretty good this year. Yeah.
Very good.
And I will tend to agree with everything that has been said, that things are improving lately. And the other thing that I would like to add is that in terms of neuroscience investment, I think that you have to find the right VCs and the right investors. So some investors have different perceptions about neuroscience risks. So I think that we cannot just generalize. We need to find the right investors and the right VCs that will support neuroscience development.
Maybe I would like to add. Of course, I mean the situation has been very different on the last 2.5 years, 3 years of this nuclear winter that we, as Lynn said, that we had in the sector, and has been particularly different for private companies and for public companies. So it's a different scenario, different pool of investors, and different, I would say, impact of the macro trends of the economy. So that has to be taken into account. In our case, we are basically addressing a disease which is particularly difficult and which is nothing approved yet. So in our talks with the pharma companies and with investors, what is always there is, well, we need regulatory clarity. So we have been working with the FDA. We got an end of phase 2 meeting this summer. We are expecting the outcome any day now. I mean, in the next 1-2 weeks. So I think that if the FDA provides this clarity that the field is demanding for this specific disease, we are going to be in a good position for either financing the company or getting a partnership up and running. So I think in overall, the space is recovering. The M&A that we have seen in the field is encouraging. And also, don't forget, the macro conditions are getting better. So we have seen the Fed basically getting down the rates last week, and there was like 3 or 4 weeks or a couple of months ago some doubts about the U.S. economy being able to keep moving forward. So I think that all the macro trends are going to be on the good direction. So probably next year is going to be NASDAQ a more friendly year for biotech in general, which means that for private companies, they will have the optionality to get public. And for the public companies, they will have, hopefully, the optionality to get better. So
very good, Carlos. On that high note, I think we have room for one question, if there are anybody.
An idea. I mean, you all benefit from your data you create to get market access ultimately, from better patients in your studies responding better. And you have the data company by company. AI now, with the latest technology, is able to completely eat through your databases, right? You don't have to structure it, you make it somehow available. We had the lady from Microsoft running healthcare for EMEA yesterday. The systems will do it now for the first time. If you gave all that data to one of your 6 companies here, you would pool and have more data. The system would produce far more precise patient identification, gene expression, everything included. You would see basically where genes are regulated up or down, whatever, yeah? What only Roche with deep pockets in biomarkers 15 years ago could do, you could do next generation with AI. And you agree on a platform, even the big players like Lilly or AstraZeneca. I was also selling S.r.l with AstraZeneca. I was happy not knowing exactly the diagnosis, yeah? And the higher the dose, basically the better for the company. That is the past. And that's also where your management probably is hesitant to do more specific individualized. But you are basically where oncology was 20 years ago. And you don't have, also oncology, they were scared to go stratification by patient group. Why don't you do that? And actually the results will get better. If you're smart, you say, we 6 companies here show the profile, what our drugs can do. So you give the sales forces later on a little tool, an app, it links to the system. The patient is sitting here in psychology and psychiatry and is doing probably 40-50% of false diagnosis. Yeah, we don't know, is it borderline, is it bipolar, is it severe or whatever, yeah? They're struggling like hell. And I promise the failure rate is very high. You would even solve that ethical problems. Why don't you make an alliance and give it to one of the 6 here at the table that has the capability and the courage and the energy?
It's not just the willingness of a few players. The problem is that you have silos. So I have a non-for-profit foundation that aims to integrate, to promote data standardization in data collection for neurodevelopmental disorders. And it's easier for non-for-profits to be able to integrate this type of effort, but still there are challenges, meaning that when the data comes from academia, the people want to be sure that they're only sharing a part of their data so that they can publish. And then you have for-profit companies who are backed by investors who have issues with proprietary features and not obligatorily sharing all of the data. And then you have actually large pharma who or actually have here, I'm going a little bit against the trend, but who have had a tendency to become a bit more generous with their data. I'm thinking about EU aims here in the context of what was done between King's College and Roche and Novartis. The problem, and this was a very laudable initiative in the field of neurodevelopmental disorders. The problem is that even with AI, and actually always with AI, if you ask the wrong question, you won't get the right answer. So if you're asking, okay, I'd like to find biomarkers for autism, well, you just won't find them because there's no biomarkers for autism. There are biomarkers for subpopulation of patients with autism. And it's a lot about the data, but it's not only about the data. It's about asking the right question, notably in the field of neuropsychiatry. I mean, it's when you prompt data, if you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer. So there's a problem of data sharing, and there's also a problem of construct validity of the indications that we're addressing.
Yeah, very
Maybe
good.
a short comment. And if there is no data that the AI can analyze, what is the basis of the answer in a way. If you think about Parkinson's disease, so you don't have all the knowledge yet, but at some point of time, hopefully, yeah, there will be fingerprints, taking blood samples, analyzing that, and then you would know which one to treat. But nowadays, there is no such data.
We have to wrap up, and I'm sure there will be more consortia that are sharing information. I know Lundbeck is involved in one consortium that is sharing information across different players. So there will be much more of that popping up where you use AI. Thanks a lot. Thanks for Sachs for inviting us, and thanks for the panel for a good discussion.